But first, although books and nightclubs may seem unlikely bedfellows, all over the UK a new kind of literary cabaret is pulling in the crowds. Are these events a sign of lowering cultural standards or new music for jaded literary ears? We dropped in on South London's Book Slam to see what everyone's raving about.
Hey folks, welcome to Book Slam!
Literary events should be for everybody.
I think people are looking to engage in books and authors in a new way.
Book Slam has arrived on the scene.
Tonight we're going to be hosting some amazing authors, poets, musicians.
If there was ever one whom when you were sleeping, who would wipe your tears when in dreams you were weeping.
Usual book readings are normally quite boring affairs, and this was something where people could come and hear their favourite authors and some new talent and have an entertaining evening at the same time.
If there was ever one to whom you could cry, who would gather each tear and blow it dry. This is about good writing getting the respect it deserves in popular culture. It's changed, for example, the idea of the book launch being the glass of wine at the local library. Why shouldn't they be in the Clapham Grand with its reds and its golds and its lighting?
It's really a relaxed atmosphere. I mean, tonight we've sold 350 tickets in advance. We're expecting about 500 people in the venue, so we'll be packed to the rafters. When the author's on stage, everybody's silent. Nobody says a word. There's not even a murmur at the bar, which is brilliant.
I'm from a long line of troublemakers. Of ash-skinned Africans born with clenched fists and a natural thirst for battle only quenched by breast milk.
Well, I don't tailor my work thinking about a specific audience. I don't sit there writing thinking, well, since I'm going to read this in a nightclub, I better make it jazzy. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause for Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
She asked the driver, who looked both confused and terrified, to stop the engine and step out of the car.
I think that I'm still quite partial to a quiet bookstore without a lot of music. I don't think that this is the future and that somehow we are all going to stop attending bookstore readings or anything. But I think, you know, the more the merrier. For me, anything that brings literature to people is a good thing.
Mrs. Njoku looked at her daughter and wanted to slap her, push her out of the car, trample her.
When you come in here, there's such warmth and love of literature. You feel it as soon as you walk through the door. And they've built a following, almost a cult following. Once, in a gathering of tribes, crawled under tables. Writing is an extremely solitary thing. Events like this afford space to come and try things out before they're nailed down, before you send them off to the publishers.
I go to a lot of gigs and concerts, and it's just really nice to listen to the spoken word and lots of different ways of doing it.
As far as I'm concerned, this is London's best literary event. You never get bored, they never leave you on for too long listening to one person. They cut from one to the next, and then they've got music and poetry, and they throw the whole shebang in.
It gives you little snippets and little bits of different bits of literature. And a lot of people read novels, they're not necessarily so into short stories or poetry, and it's nice to have that variety.
If there was ever one to whom when you run, who push back the clouds so that you're bathed in sun.
Books are fantastic and enjoyable, and why shouldn't it be something you do with your friends, like going to see a film or going out to a gig? It's something you can share with people, and I think we've created something, an environment that you can do that in.
All of this is the performance equivalent of the Kindle and the iPad. Will we read the Kindle to read our books? Will we come to an event like Book Slam to enjoy poetry? If you're a traditionalist, you may say no. That's okay, because millions will.
Well, it looks very exciting, Akala. I'm not sure about millions, but do you think events like that do introduce new readers? I mean, in Noah, one of the guys there talked about the fact that you walk in and the atmosphere is absolutely buzzing with this expectation for literature. So it does sound a bit like the audience is made up of the converted already, perhaps.
It is. I mean, I performed at one and Zadie Smith was reading, which was wonderful. I don't necessarily know if it's about cultivating new audiences. I just think it's a different kind of expression of literary passion than perhaps we're used to or we're told we should accept. But I don't necessarily think people that are not into literature are going to those events.
But what's the atmosphere like then? Is it like a gig? I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's exactly like a gig, and I think it should be. I think the idea that authors can't be rock stars or can't be popular cultural icons anymore is rather absurd, if you ask me, and they should be treated as such. And it is, you get a sense that the authors at those events are kind of become like the celebrities. When Zadie Smith was there, people were coming up asking her for autographs, talking to her. She had to be kept backstage because otherwise people would have been bothering her before her reading. I think that's healthy.
Well,
at least she's got a talent.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was the sort of the star at that particular event, but she talked about there still being a need for sort of places of quiet reflection and so on. Do you think that it is very much an event, Joan, that's for the kind of soundbite culture of the 21st century, and perhaps books should be kept in a slightly more reverential place?
No, my novel's about the 60s and set in Liverpool, and what was happening then was that people were coming together just in cellars and bars and things and writing and reading poetry to each other, and it gave birth to the Liverpool poets and so on. But they were doing it because they just wanted to do it. And what's interesting about that book slam is that it was about reading aloud. And that is one of the great pleasures, whether it's a mother reading to a child or friends reading to each other, people reading at festivals. Reading aloud is one of the great pleasures, and being read to is really a delight, isn't it?
But it must make life easy for someone like you, Pamela, because you are a performer, you've been a performer, so reading aloud and appearing at an event of that nature wouldn't be a problem. But do you feel that there's a sort of demand on writers these days to be performing animals? You know, I'm sure there are brilliant authors out there who would die in front of an audience, you know, with either terror or incompetence.
Well, indeed, but I really welcome it. I mean, I think Book Slam sounds wonderful, but it's really a return to an 18th century and a 19th century idea, isn't it? I mean, look at the great writers in those days. I mean, they were rock stars. People like Melville and Robert Louis Stevenson were the Mick Jaggers of that time. So it's just a return and a welcome one. I think it's wonderful to see somebody who is charismatic, who's comfortable to be up there reading their own words aloud. I think there's nothing sexier, actually.
But Joan, do you think that it does in some way affect the way we read? Because if we do get addicted to this sort of short soundbite version of reading, does our capacity to sit down with a giant tome diminish, do you think?
Well, you can't go straight from school books to giant tomes, can you? You've got to. There's every kind of reading, and small reading, and quick little, the haiku, the Japanese 13 syllables. There's every kind of experience with words. It can be long. Dickens, reading all of his books. He was the rock star of the 19th century. Yes. I mean, he played to packed houses. Oscar Wilde, the same. It's to do with the energy and the ideas, as well as the skill with words. There are multifarious mixes of these different talents. You can have it every way you want.
And we're already addicted to the soundbite, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Love them myself.
Nothing's going to change that.
But, Carla, why do you think it's happening now? Because Joan mentioned there about the 1960s and there being this huge flourishing of that kind of poetry and so on in performance. Why do you think it's happening now? Because, you know, we're led to believe all the time that we're living in a culture that's incredibly obsessed with only the high tech and you know, computers and so on. So why do you think people are turning to words in the way that they seem to be?
I think we were discussing this backstage, actually. I think people are bored. I think people are bored of being told, you know, if you're intelligent, you're not sexy. People are bored of people who have, no offense, but, you know, have no real talent being elevated as, you know, models for us to aspire to. I think people want to be inspired again, and there's nothing more inspirational than great literature throughout human history. That's been a constant, you know, and whether that's delivered verbally or in the form of a text doesn't really matter. So I think people are turning away from the modes of popular culture just because they're bored.
Do you think it makes for a different kind of writing? Because I suppose one does write differently if one's planning to perform it.
But Carol Ann Duffy, the poet laureate, has said that texting is the new poetry. And when you think of the challenge of a tweet, when you've got 140 items to go, you have to think what you say. You have to shape your language, and the shaping of language, which results in poetry, literature, rap, everything, song, is one of the most thrilling things you can do. So to introduce young people, new audiences to it, everyone, have a go. The language is waiting for you.